Sunday arrives, and the sun is as brilliant as ever. Hoping to explore less populated paths, I start out in the opposite direction from yesterday and walk toward the older part of town, where I wander through the narrow, vacant streets. The early morning calm is alluring. Only the occasional cries of circling seagulls and the ringing of the bells belonging to St. Peter and St. Paul interrupt the stillness of the hour. No businesses are open. Clinging to its late 18th century reputation as a quiet and respectable watering place, Cromer has periodically chosen to preserve vestiges of its former peaceful, even Sabbath-like demeanor. Indeed, on this serene and tranquil Sunday morning, the town could still be thought a paradise for the clergy and old ladies, a phrase that appears in John Grieve Knoll's 1866 description of Cromer. It's therefore not hard to imagine a Miss Buxton or Mrs. Upshur from the 1830s Cromer Ladies' Bible Association campaigning against prevailing temptations, while urging their listeners to find delight by reading the Bible rather than frequenting vulgar places of public amusement. These ladies' attempts seem not to have been in vain, for today no glitzy bingo halls, extensive gaudy fairgrounds, strip clubs, or venues packed with slot machines congregate on the beachfront. Cromer has a history of banishing such rude entertainments. Indeed, in 1990, after a gale severely damaged the modest amusement arcade on the Cromer Pier, authorities, as if still honoring the town's earlier resolve to maintain its respectable charm, decided not to replace the venue and promote instead the beauties of the area's natural setting. In a sense, their decision reflects some oblique indebtedness to the example of those late 19th century officials who not only discouraged the presence of fops and fine girls sporting their ribbons and curls, but also barred raucous troops of minstrels, German bands, and chiromancers from roaming and sullying Cromer's beaches. These were once popular forms of seaside entertainment in places like Brighton, Margate, and Great Yarmouth. Desiring to maintain a respectable image, these Victorian officials also hired a keeper of the jetty. His job was not only to preserve good order, but also to prevent improper persons from obtruding themselves. Therefore, when vacationing gentlemen and ladies once paraded in the evenings on the 240-foot wooden jetty so as to enjoy the pure sea breezes and gaze at the fire spectacle of the setting sun or the mild splendor of the moon, this keeper stood at its entrance so as to prevent the lower classes from intruding. He enforced the rule that servants in livery, as well as all common persons, not be permitted on the jetty. Local inhabitants were only allowed to stroll there on Sundays. The keeper also made sure that no ladies were present after 9 p.m. It's disturbing to think that this morning's tranquility is partially beholden not only to a history of racial prejudice, but also to class and gender discrimination. I leave behind these still narrow streets and amble down toward the beach. Except for the restlessness of the sea, all is subdued here too. Heading south, I follow a route that will eventually recall a verse from John Taylor's 17th century poem about Cromer. Taylor had once looked out from where I wander and observed the raging tide that recurrently beats against the Cromer cliffs and into the land doth eat. I shall come to understand the truth of his words and witness the sad evidence of the North Sea's voracious appetite. For over a mile I walk alone along the sands. Initially, I feel free and pleased to be following my own impulses. As time passes, however, I become aware that where I tread is gradually changing character and becoming progressively packed with shingle, clumps of earth, and slippery rocks. While I do my best to navigate this obstacle course, the incoming tide draws nearer to my boots. Swirls of foaming white and emerald green water press beyond where they last washed ashore. The sea rhythmically draws back only to start again and restlessly progresses even closer to my feet. I realize that these relentless overlapping waves might shortly trap me between the sea to my left and the lofty, brittle land jutting into the sea on my right. Indeed, mine soon might be the fate of the Victorian tourist featured in a 19th century satirical Punch cartoon. Caught by the treacherous tide, the trapped visitor must rely on an enterprising sailor who, anticipating the moment, waits close to shore in a rowboat to profit from the tourist's dilemma. The trapped visitor proclaims, "Good gracious, the place where I sat with seawater is rapidly filling." Soon the hoarse voice of a local sailor can be heard. "Sir, you're caught by the tide. I'll carry you off for a shilling." No enterprising local is around to help me, however. I decide, therefore, to retrace my steps. In a pinch, I know that I could not possibly scramble up these banks to safety. During my retreat, the humor of Punch's ridicule quickly evaporates, for Taylor's sense of the insatiably destructive sea becomes increasingly vivid. Tragedy and loss attend this landscape. I notice, for instance, rusted skeletal remains of a caravan park that has recently fallen victim to the ocean's hunger. No longer able to cling to the crumbling earth that once supported this holiday site, its contents have tumbled down the cliffs. Now, misshapen steel carcasses, once the edifices of so much pleasure and expectation, hang tangled among the bushes growing in the blue clay banks that partially resist the relentless assault of oncoming tides and storms. Later in my retreat, and closer to the town, I raise my eyes and notice a large wedge of white chalk cliff perched atop an adjoining clay crag, and understand that it too will eventually be splintered by gales, somersault down, and swallowed by the sea, for the moment, displaying a gleaming whiteness, it stands stoically erect, like a luminous, brave sentry awaiting its sentence. The sight is sobering. The North Norfolk coast has some of the most rapidly eroding coastline in Europe. I believe at least 1 meter of land per annum has been lost for thousands of years. These ceaseless attacks have created many a gap and a breach. Buildings have had to be demolished or have toppled over the edge. Immense masses of land have detached from the cliff, thundered down, and creating an awful spectacle, tumbled onto the beach. In the 14th century, for instance, a prosperous town, Shipton, and its goodly church, slipped into the deep. Graveyards, too close to the cliff's edge, composed of yielding gravel, clay, and sand, fell to their twice-earned death. As a consequence, it was not uncommon for human bones to wash up on shore. Verses from Algernon Swinburne's poem, North Sea, vividly describe the collapse of a graveyard into the sea. Naked, shamed, cast out of consecration, corpse and coffin, yea, the very graves, scoffed at, scattered, shaken from their station, desolate beyond man's desolation. Shrink and sink into the waste of waves, tombs with bare white piteous bones protruded, shroudless, down the loose collapsing banks, crumble from their constant place detruded, that the sea devours and gives no thanks. Moreover, at low water, slabs of old stones and walls from this town were once said to be visible. It is said that at the time, some desperately poor and opportunistic people would sleep on the shore, waiting until low tide, when they could dive down and pillage anything worth taking from old Shipton. It is also reported that when holidaymakers in the 19th century walked along the cliffs at very low tide, they hoped to catch sight of the remnants of the old church. Some claimed to hear its bells striking amid the movement of the waves. Apparently, in 1888, a small pleasure steamer christened Victoria ran aground on this site and struck the remnants of the church tower. To prevent further incidents, the town authorities blew up the submerged debris. Now, nothing of the old Shipton is visible. The tide thrashing also sometimes exposes vestiges of life from thousands of years ago. For instance, a storm on February the 5th, 2017, revealed a prehistoric rhinoceros. Other surges have washed up mammoth skeletons. The place is rich in Pleistocene glacial fossils. Remarkably, after a recent storm, there was also a discovery of preserved footprints showing that there were long extinct ancestors of human habitation along the coast about 850,000 years ago. These people would have lived among and feasted upon the woolly mammoth. And submerged in the deep pathways of the southern North Sea are the remnants of Doggerland, which during the Ice Age connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. The sea is not just a destroyer, but also, paradoxically, a preserver. It constantly surfaces the past. When I finally leave the shifting sands and reach the security of the promenade, I ask a passerby for directions to the coastal path that I probably should have taken earlier. I climb up a narrow, steep trail that meanders through gorse, heather, ferns, and brambles, not to mention stinging nettles, and eventually arrive at a Victorian lighthouse on top of the cliffs. Here is another reminder of the power of the sea and the vulnerability for those who live near and on it. The original lighthouse, at first lit by coal fire and fanned by hand-operated bellows, nearly came to its end when, in the winter of 1812-1813, an acre and a half of land directly in front of it collapsed into the sea. After another landslip in 1832, a new lighthouse was built. This edifice, too, would have succumbed if it had not been erected further inland, away from the fragile crag. The afternoon is passing too quickly. It's time to turn around and make my way back down to the beach. There I catch a view of the Hotel de Paris, where Alfred Tennyson and later in 1892, Oscar Wilde had once stayed. What a grand place this must have been. And then I come upon two fishermen relaxed next to their boats. As in Sheringham, fishing is no longer the primary means of living. There is loss here too. By 2018, young people are looking elsewhere for their livelihood. The crabs and lobsters of summer, the longshore herring of autumn, and the cod of winter are not as abundant as they once were. To complicate matters, as Brexit approaches, there are unresolved arguments over fishing rights and the greed of refrigerator ships. Since Cromer has no harbour, a number of years ago, these men would have had to pull their boats up on shore. As one elderly fisherman recalls, when you'd hauled by hand, you knew you'd done it. A century before, while carrying the nets, sails, oars, and masts, they would have heaved their boats through crashing breakers to and from the beach. Now tractors take that burden. Once a crowd would have stood on the sands to witness the coming in of fishermen's barks during autumn equinox. They would have watched a mountainous sea washing over the boat's stern and then throwing the vessel aloft until it seemed to topple into the depths of oblivion. All would have been saved when a wave of dreadful force finally hurled the bark upon the shore. These were difficult and dangerous times. Death at sea was a commonplace. When I pass by Cromer's lifeboat station, I am reminded that the storms whipping this coast make it one of the most dangerous for shipping. During 1699, 200 ships were lost in what was then called Cromer Bay. And in 1866, nearly 1,000 ships were destroyed on the east coast in 6 months, popularly called floating coffins. These were mainly small vessels bringing in coal from Newcastle to London. The sea is a graveyard of wrecks. After all this, it's almost a relief to come in sight of Cromer's thriving and stylish pier. Built to replace the old jetty, which had been dismantled after a coal boat smashed into it. Completed in 1902, the pier soon became the place where gentlefolk promenaded among a dazzle of sea lights. It defiantly, yet gracefully, stretches and flings itself out 495 feet into the sea. In this landscape of encroaching destruction, the structure offers the illusion of resilience. However, throughout its life, storms, gales, tidal surges, and ships have threatened and severely damaged its structure. On December 5th, 2013, a storm surge significantly damaged this pier and wrecked the seafront. Thankfully, unlike the old, sad West Pier at Brighton, Cromer's still stands upright. It refuses to become a monument composed of destroyed, twisted girders and dedicated to what the poet Hugo Williams refers to as dead holidays. At its end rises the Grand Pavilion Theatre, opened in 1905. At last, I stand before a landmark from my early adolescence. One of the most vivid memories of my 1952 holiday in Cromer is being taken to the variety show in this auditorium and singing with the audience, "There's a hole in my bucket." How exhilarating it was to join in this popular circular jingle and laugh as Liza and Harry consider how they are going to mend a bucket and discover that to do so, they need to fetch water. But there's a hole in my bucket. On this late Sunday afternoon, I step onto the pier and stroll among the few stragglers extending the day. The sky is changing, the shadows are growing deeper. Clouds drift across what had been a clear blue expanse. A solitary gull glides above. The wind picks up. I pass by those clinging to the last of the hour's warmth. They settle into chairs placed behind protective sheets or perch on benches in Victorian-style shelters. For a moment, I draw close to others who lean over the railings so as to gaze at eternity and catch the spray from the waves dashing against the pier's supports. It is almost the hour to leave. I hasten up the hill, collect my rucksack from the hotel lobby, and go to the station. Though not as effusively as an 1841 visitor who wrote, quote, "Farewell, then, Cromer. Farewell, magnificent billows, ye lofty cliffs, ye swelling hills, ye verdant woods, and ye pure and invigorating breezes." I bid a fond goodbye. Once back in Norfolk, I catch the 4:30 p.m. train to Cambridge. This time the seats are packed with those, like myself, who are returning from a weekend away. When the train approaches Ely, the eerie silhouette of the 14th century Ely Cathedral looms high on a hill above the wet, flat landscape of the fens below. The sky's blood-red brilliance and deep yellow illuminate the cathedral's distinctive tower so that, like a lighthouse, it rises above everything. Like the cliffs and the lighthouses of Cromer, I have left behind. This tower, too, once collapsed, and in the 19th century had to be rebuilt. It seems that reminders of the loss and destruction that I witnessed in Cromer stalk my return journey. Back in Cambridge by 9 o'clock, I fall into bed and listen to the rain beginning to pound on the hallway skylight. The next day, between heavy showers, I return to the university library, refreshed and ready to start again. Paradoxically, Cromer, so often the victim of the wild sea, has also revealed its power to resuscitate life. Perhaps Mr. Woodhouse spoke wisely when in Jane Austen's Emma, he advised Isabel, his elder daughter, to take Dr. Perry's advice and spend a week in Cromer. My dear, Dr. Perry was a week in Cromer once, and he holds it to be the best of all sea-bathing places. A fine open sea, he says, and very pure air. I vow periodically to take other solitary walks along other parts of the East Anglia coast, particularly in areas unfamiliar to me. And so I shall, in November, December, and February, before I regretfully must leave Cambridge and return home.